Okay. Okay. I hope you're seeing a picture of Alan Simpson. He just died at the age of 95, and here is Iko with Alan Simpson. They had common roots in Cody, Wyoming. And we were there in 2017. Carol Marotta invited us to this political forum. And here he was, age 87. And then here he is a couple of years ago at age 93 at Heart Mountain. You remember that, Shigeko? And then
Yes.
at that political meeting, Simpson said that Trump had the IQ of a shoebox. Okay, and then here's what Trump's doing with his IQ. Mike Stein sent this on. Thank you, Mike. And this article apparently is going to link to one of our later topics, Manifest Destiny. A few cartoons to keep us smiling. The only book left is Project 2025. And then there was this whole raft of humorous things that came at the inadvertent inclusion of a journalist in a top secret meeting. So they're Star Wars, they're talking about the Death Star, which he knows about because he was inadvertently added in a group chat. And then there's Admiral Akbar here in a hologram. Inadvertently finds out about the bombing of Alderaan, but this is my favorite. So Ramsey sent this, just a reflection how we can meditate on how lucky we've been to be born at the right time when America was leading the world. It was also a time when population growth spurred a lot of economic prosperity. Ramsey added these red dots down here. We just happened to be lucky enough to fall just as things were taking off. And North American prosperity, we caught a real wave of affluence and totally lucky. And a lot of our mutual funds have grown because we live in a nation of entrepreneurs. This is a comparison of American economic activity to European economic activity. Using these units up here. I won't get into the details, but I think that graph says a lot. Then you remember I presented Yuval Levin, a constitutional scholar who was still kind of sanguine when Ezra Klein interviewed him. Most recently, he's been pressed on that and reminded what he said to Ezra Klein. And his response was interesting. He said there's kind of a musical chairs going on between the three branches of government, legislature, courts, and president. and it's been caused by a vacuum in the legislature not doing its job. So, because the legislature is deferring to the president, he's actually carrying out an agenda that the legislature is supposed to be setting, as envisioned by the founding fathers. And that in turn, the courts now are double checking the president to make sure that his execution is being done properly. And that overactivity of the courts is causing the legislature to introduce legislation to impeach judges. So you've got this kind of weird musical chairs rotating, and the different functions being rotated around. I thought that was kind of interesting. Carol can't get in. I wonder why that is. Tell her to try again.
She's tried 5 times. Okay, I'll send you a link, okay? Again, a different clean link and see if it works.
Okay, good luck, Carol. Sorry. I should see it when she gets in. So this caught my attention, and I thought I'd use it to lead off our discussion of religion. It appears that Gen Z is getting religion. If you look back to 1972, there were only 5% of people who weren't religious. And that had swelled most recently almost to 30%. But new data shows that Gen Z might be reversing that trend. And so, and why is that? 3/4 of Gen Z report feeling lonely. And one person said, join a church and the people in the church don't get to reject you. So this is some kind of solace. And it's perhaps reducing a trend of people turning away from religion. But turning away from religion is kind of a relative concept, because the United States starts from a very high degree of religiosity. And so you just got to bear that in mind, and we'll see some data in just a second to put that into perspective. So globally, most religions are growing, and growing up towards America's traditional high religious affiliation rate. So notice here that there's an inflection point in 1960 to 70. And I think that this is important. So you see that Christianity and Islam turns up at that time. So what could have happened that would have bent an increase the growth of religion? Yes?
Hippies grew, and they
hippies. Okay, there was that, but the Economist did a special the Economist did a special report that it was Israel's conquest of Jerusalem that kicked off the first domino in increasing religiosity in the whole world, because the looming tower, which was the story of why we had 9/11, the actual looming tower of the book was the burning towers in Beirut after Israel bombed Lebanon. And that's what incited bin Laden into action. And so you get the taking of the holy city of Jerusalem, and that means a lot to Muslims. So they came out with this special report, and this is the cover that week, and it's specifically Temple Mount. Israel had been in West Jerusalem, but not the old city. They didn't have Temple Mountain. That's where Islam's Al-Aqsa Mosque is, and it's not as important as Mecca, obviously, but it's an important religious site. And the Muslim world saw the Israel taking of Jerusalem as a crusade, and I'll put the crusades in the context in just a second. They saw Christianity, which has more believers than anybody else in the world. They saw Christianity as a threatening plurality, threatening their religion. Yeah, good. Carol, you made it. Sorry, I don't know what the problem was. Just think of it, Israel's Six-Day War, they really expanded their territory, and of course that gave them the Sinai, which they eventually worked out in a deal with Egypt. But it's this territory that had been maintained by Jordan as kind of a mandate by the UN in 1948. Well, all of a sudden, Jordan's out of the picture, and Israel occupies all this, including all of Jerusalem, and in particularly Temple Mountain with the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So just a quick review of the Jerusalem timeline. Constantine converted to Christianity to start the clock at 313. When the Roman Empire became Christian. Then the Muslims conquered it in 638. So that's where Muslims around the world see the clock beginning. The Crusades interrupted Muslim control for 88 years. The Crusaders occupied Jerusalem, but Saladin reconquered for the Islam and takes Jerusalem, and it remained under Islamic control later with the Ottoman Empire, which gave it a few centuries of stability until after World War I and the story of Lawrence of Arabia, when Britain captures Jerusalem and turns it into a mandate, a British mandate. A mandate means they're not going to stay forever, but they're going to manage it until something can replace the Ottoman Empire, which had ceased to exist. They were on the losing side. And Britain maintained control. It was very violent at times and hard for them to maintain control. but the United Nations took it over and created a state. The United Nations created the state of Israel and gave Israel West Jerusalem, not the old city, not Temple Mount, not where the Al-Aqsa Mosque was. That maintained under the control of Jordan. And then the Six-Day War in 1967, that changed everything for Muslims. And all of a sudden, one of their shrines is under Israel control in the old city. For the first time, Israel controls the famous West Wall, which they hadn't controlled for ever since the fall. They were Temple Mountain. They were thrown out by the Romans in the year 70. So it was a momentous occasion for both Muslims and Jews, but now with the United States involved in the United Nations, we're also in the mix. And so ever since then, the United Nations has been the site of a contested occupation. It has never received United Nations endorsement. And so I'm presenting the Muslim point of view because it shows what caused the dominoes to fall and the increase of religiosity really all around the world. If you look at the curves, Hinduism increased. And you have Security Council resolutions accusing Israel of violation of international law. I won't get into the numbers. America has vetoed a number of those resolutions. And the General Assembly, which doesn't carry the weight of international law, it's just the opinion of the world, they've passed 154 resolutions critical of Israel. So public opinion is very much against what happened in 1967. And so you layer on the most recent things and it gets kind of messy. But Muslims were used to holding Temple Mount and their Al-Aqsa Mosque for 93% of the time since 636. 93% of the time. And so it has been very hard for them to accept what's going on. And so you have this increase of jihad, really, increased religiosity among Muslims, and then also in tandem, an increase of Christians around the world, and you see even Hinduism has gone up. This, though, looks at projected change based on projected population growth. And because the Muslim reproduction rate is higher, it'll approach in another 25 years, it'll approach the number of Christians in the world. This breaks down the denominations of the world in 2025. Islam Sunni is the largest single block, but you see that Christianity is splintered. And I'm not going to go into detail on this. You see that Shintoism makes the list. Buddhism, the two types of Buddhism make the list. But the splintering of Christianity, just look at all the different religions that have come out of Christianity. And part of the problem is when you say that you believe in a special person, Jesus, and he's of this world, but also part of heaven, and you start arguing about what is the essence of Jesus, and you can get many different points of view with this splintering. So I put this up to show Europe. We're having, especially led by J.D. Vance, we're having a dispute with Europe. And what is it based on? Well, J.D. Vance is, some say, a Christian nationalist. And he notices that Europe is no longer very Christian at all. And that includes Britain. And part of the problem might be that all the European countries have what was called an established religion, a religion that is associated with the state. And we don't have that in the United States, and we'll be talking about why that is. But paradoxically, without an established state religion, that gives the citizenry freedom to define what they want. And that may be one factor in why America has traditionally been more religious, although we're less so than we were a couple of decades ago. We still pretty much lead the Western world in religiosity. You see the Muslim world, much higher percentages of people saying that religion is very important. So this is the answer to the question. Very important. You see, the United States is more religious than Canada. Mexico's not far behind. Brazil's a very religious country, and we'll talk about that in a second. But here you see really Islamic countries. Some of these countries are, in fact, Christian. Ethiopia is a very religious Christian country. Indonesia over here in Asia is the most religious Muslim. Japan very low. China the lowest of all. And surprisingly, Russia's low. But the next map, and I'll be showing another map in just a second that kind of contradicts that. So this shows that Russia maybe is a little more religious than the last map. But the deep purple, again, confirms that Islamic countries are more religious. So this is this map of entrepreneurism again, and in this context, I wonder if we can ask: does it related at all to religion? We remember the Protestant ethic. And if that ethic is alive and well in America, but not in Europe, that might explain a part of this. But that's just wild speculation. I have no idea if that's true. And in America, though, mainline denominations are decreasing. And that is part of why we're coming down from a very high rate to a merely high rate. Um, but there's a couple of exceptions to this. Pentecostal. And I think explaining why Pentecostal's going up kind of taps into our history. You'll see that in just a second. Interestingly, Presbyterian, this is Presbyterian, I'm sorry. This is Presbyterian here, it's increasing, and this is Pentecostal. They're the only two that are headed up. All the other denominations are headed down, including Southern Baptist, which has been racked with a number of scandals, as you can see. So the global growth of Pentecostals is truly remarkable, the fastest growing denomination in the world. And you can see that it's growing most in Brazil and most in the global South, also in United States and Mexico, traditionally religious countries. So and here are the absolute numbers over here. Astounding growth. So where did Pentecostal come from? And there's gonna be a number of religious principles that'll draw on this example. But it was Pentecostalism was a fledgling movement, first in Kansas, where this guy Charles Fox Parham complained that his Methodist religion, the preachers were not left to preach by direct inspiration. And he felt he needed to let his emotions go and feel a communion with God. So he started an itinerant evangelistic ministry, just itinerant, traveling around. And his travels took him to Houston, where he met and strongly bonded with a William Seymour. And he said to Seymour, why don't you go to Los Angeles and see what you can do there? Well, William Seymour struck gold in Los Angeles. This is where the Pentecostal movement just burst forward with an explosive growth. And this is the place where it happened. This is on Azusa Street, and therefore it was called the Azusa Street Revival. And everybody recognizes now this is where this international growth of the most rapidly growing denomination in the world, this is where it happened, right there, led by William Seymour. Where is Azusa Street? Aiko Shigeko and I were quite near Azusa Street last Christmas in near Little Tokyo. That's how close this revival was to downtown Los Angeles. And this is William Seymour. This is his wife. And you can see that his congregation is interracial. And this is an important point, and we'll see it again, that revivalism, evangelicals, are often accommodating to other races. So you saw on the map that Brazil was the darkest color for Pentecostalism, and this is the Grand Temple in Brazil, and fascinating that it was bought there by a Swedish Pentecostal missionary. What? I thought I was so taken with that fact that it was a Swedish missionary. I went into his background, and as a young Swede, when he was 18 years old, he felt that God spoke to him. So where do you go in 1903 when God has spoken to you? You go to America and you go to seminary. He went to Chicago Theological Seminary, and he drew on his personal experience with the Trinities. So the Father, God, the Son, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost. And so in the religious experience of Pentecostalism, it's the Holy Ghost, the Spirit, that you have a direct relationship to, and you may also wind up speaking in tongues. And so he winds up going to the Azusa Street revival, really a pilgrimage, and then off to Brazil. So a very interesting story, a very interesting movement, international and the quickest growing religion in the world. Maybe second quickest, these are small absolute numbers, but growing. And so it's reached 15 million people, the Mormons have. And a lot of that comes from natural growth because they have a high birth rate. But we're all familiar with Mormon missionaries. Every Mormon has to go on a mission. Mitt Romney, perhaps the most famous Mormon in America, he went to France for his missionary work. But you see that they've had a pretty good penetration again in the global South. So the global South seems to be open to new denominations. The origins of Mormonism, Mike and Rudy and I were talking a little bit about this yesterday. The Erie Canal, there were a lot of religious ferment going on in upstate New York. And why is that? That ideas can travel along a canal, so there's that aspect of it. But a lot of social reform movements, in addition to Mormonism, came alive in upstate New York, including the women's rights movement in Seneca Falls in 1848. There was a convention. I'll come back to that. And also in upstate New York, Frederick Douglass lived there for a while. So they were very much involved in the abolition of slavery up there. And Iko and I visited the Women's Rights National Historical Park in Seneca Falls, where this famous convention was held. And they have these statues of the famous people that attended. Here's Frederick Douglass. He was invited as a speaker. So here's upstate New York, roughly defining a corridor of the Erie Canal. And there was such intensity up there that it was one of the birthplaces of the Second Great Awakening. It spread the Second Great Awakening spread up there pretty quick. And I'll be talking about the First Great Awakening and the very beginning of the Second Great Awakening in a second. But there was such intensity up there that this whole corridor was called the burned over district. And many evangelical sects started up there. In addition to the Mormons, you had the Seventh-day Adventists, and also utopian groups setting up utopian communities, all part of that. So I'm asking. I saw this, and it said, "Are we ripe for a spiritual revival now?" And this article made me think maybe we are, because Christian entertainment has risen. There's this book, The Chosen, The Life of Jesus, that has been viewed by 280 million people. There's also on Netflix the biography of Mary, also heavily viewed, even though critics have been harsh. I won't repeat what the critics have said. The Chosen was unlikely. It had to be crowd funded before it could be jump started and released. And it's been so successful. It's in the 5th season, and it's going to be showing in, it just started showing in cinemas last week, before it'll move to Prime. Again, bad reviews, but it's been pointed out that Christianity grows well in atmosphere of persecution. Also, there have been books about Christianity that are selling. There's another show about a Californian pastor in the 1970s. And another about King David, also very bad reviews, but popular. And there's more in the pipeline, 7 more religious projects, Christian projects specifically, are coming. So these movies are kind of feel good, give you something worth believing in, and that's reassuring. The villains always get their comeuppance, if not in this world, then probably in the next. And again, available on Netflix. So the religious breakdown of church affiliation. You can see the Bible Belt, the Deep South, but also a strip across here, and these match up with Republican states. So Democrats have found themselves on the wrong side of religion. But how did we get this strip across the United States? There's a great joint venture on PBS between the American Experience and Frontline. This I think came out in 2008. It's 6 parts, and it's very good, and it explains how God in America has determined a lot, our court system, our political system, how religious dissidents could survive in this country, like the Pilgrims. They were dissidents in England, and this country not having an established religion meant that new religions could pop up, and revivals could easily emerge. And that eventually morphed into social reform movements. So I'll make the point that this is very relevant to the point where we are in American expansionism. It's very important for understanding the background of manifest destiny. And it also has a lot to do with Turner's frontier thesis. So this is the slide where we left off. has been pointed out, Colombia is carrying a telegraph wire, carrying a book, and promoting the American way of life at the expense of Native Americans. And so this is definitely expression of American imperialism, which we'll be talking a little bit more. But this prepares the soil for American imperialism, this notion of manifest destiny. American Indians are in the news, but the poor Californian Native Americans, this is the last of his tribe, Ishi. And there were a number of massacres in California, and we get to this point in history. It's a real tragedy, especially the one up in Eureka, 40 Native Americans massacred by settlers. But a little tangent, Trump's administration has cracked down on anything that's hints of DEI, and so in the process, innocent bystanders have been Native American tribes. The Indian tribe, the Code Talkers, that provided a valuable service in World War II between the islands of the Pacific, sending messages that the Japanese couldn't possibly understand. Heather Cox Richardson has pointed out that 10 articles about the Code Talkers have disappeared from U.S. military websites. Information about black and women serving in the military similarly disappeared. So this is hopefully short-lived, but a real McCarthyism, almost Salem witchcraft. Of course, one of these soldiers is an American Indian, Ira Hayes. So where does this come from? Let's start Manifest Destiny at the very beginning. When the Pilgrims came, they thought they were bringing with them a unique moral virtue. They wanted to redeem the world. They thought of America as a new Jerusalem, a promised land, and they thought they were divinely ordained to bring a new world. And the actual term manifest destiny didn't make it into presidential politics until 1844, and we'll talk about what a pivotal year that was for the American expansionism. But the first Great Awakening, I promised, this is Jonathan Edwards. He was actually a forerunner of in his family tree of Aaron Burr. There were other famous names, but he transcended the different denominations to present a unified message, also entailing personal conversations with the Holy Spirit. And his God was an angry God. It wasn't just in America. It had swept Britain before it came here. Anybody could get up and talk. It's extemporaneous. sharing deep personal feelings and the sense that you're on the edge of salvation. The Baptists in America were an important denomination. It was Jefferson's first big case defending Baptists. Against whom? Against the established Anglican Church. In America, the Anglicans morphed into Episcopalians, so like they use that interchangeably in the New World. But they were very much on the defense from the established church. Before we were, while we were still under Britain's thumb, the Anglican Church was the established church. Baptists believed very much in immersion in water and coming up and being born again. And everybody was expected salvation from this. I don't know if you've seen the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But there's a famous scene where one of the characters gets baptized. He comes up. He says, "Well, that's it, boys. I've been redeemed. The preacher done washed away all my sins and transgressions. It's a straight and narrow for me from here on, and heaven's everlasting my reward. All my sins washed away, and including the robbery of a Piggly Wiggly. But neither God nor man's got nothing on me now. Come on, boys, the water's fine." That was the rendering in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" So Jefferson takes this case, but who's on the other side? Patrick Henry. He's defending the established church for clergymen like this guy. Interesting alignment. But the Baptist preachers were itinerant, that again, moving around. But pretty soon, these circuit riders were being arrested for preaching without a license, being outside the accepted established church. So in his defense, Jefferson formulated the separation of church and state. This is where it was born, in this case that he was taking on behalf of the Baptists. Ultimately, he won his case. A new law was passed in the Virginia House of Burgesses. It took a while. It took 7 years since it was introduced to finally get passed. And then 5 years later, it made it into the Bill of Rights, the freedom of religion. But it still had to be interpreted and worked into the system. And how was that done? Well, when Jefferson was president, drawing upon his experiences, he wrote a letter to the Baptist Association describing the wall of separation. And the phrase in this letter, which became public, found its way into a decision by the Supreme Court. So this letter that he'd written is eventually a part of the public record and drawn on by the Supreme Court. And there's been many cases since then that talk about this wall of separation, the separation of church and state. And so it came in handy on the frontier. There's no churches. So whoever you can find to talk about religious matters, and then to make it a little bit more efficient, the idea of the camp meeting was born. So there's a song 40 years ago that we sing at our campfire sometimes, essentially about a camp meeting. So it's part of the culture. And especially in the early frontier days in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Indiana, you had these camp meetings. Um, and this is probably what de Tocqueville noted as he traveled around the United States, these camp meetings. Um, and anything goes. This wasn't traditional religion, very emotive. And I think some of us have seen black churches meeting. They were also similarly emotive. These are all pictures from this special from Frontline, an American experience on God in America, capturing the revivals. And it really laid the groundwork for the Pentecostals at the Azusa Street revival. It grew out of this kind of religiosity, and again, multiracial. Um, there was a famous incident, the so-called haystack prayer meeting, where some students from Williams College were on a weekend laying in a haystack looking up at the sky. And like bull sessions in college dorms, they started thinking about, well, what could we do? Maybe we could bring the promised land to the rest of the world. And this was an important incident because they took action, and they started in motion the missionary work of the Protestant church. And especially they focused on the people of Asia. The first missionaries went 6 years later to India, directly related to this spontaneous meeting. And then some missionaries were sent to the Holy Land. One of them being the Steinbecks from Germany. Yes, that Steinbeck, his ancestors were missionaries in Israel, or Palestine, I'm sorry, at that time, Palestine. But with the return to Palestine, somebody, I'm sorry, had their hand up.
It's me. What was that ABC? You had an abbreviation one slide back. ABCFM. What's that?
Yeah,
Wait a minute. Go forward.
yeah, there.
What? Yeah, what's this? This ABCFM.
1812.
Then its first missionary.
Yeah. It's the missionary organization. The M stands for missionary. I don't know what the rest stands for.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, so the missionary movement. So it was folded into this one umbrella organization. Um, so the Holy Land was especially important. There was a feeling that if the Jews returned to Israel, that would enable the second coming. And you still hear that today. This was part of this initial movement. The only problem with sending missionaries, including the Steinbecks, to Palestine, was the first few died from infectious disease. It was the sanitation facilities were pretty low for somebody coming in from the Western world. But this missionary movement send missionaries to China and Hawaii, and when we get to talking about the American imperialist movement, you'll see how important the missionaries were, particularly in Hawaii. The other part of this was the affinity for this movement with the Old Testament, the story of the Hebrew Bible. And because this movement was interested in Jews returning to Palestine, the second coming could come. This has been referred to as Christian Zionism, which reminds people of Cyrus the Great, who liberated the Jews from Babylonian capture. Starting a tradition of Gentiles who were Zionists, and we see in the evangelical movement a particular love for Israel. The other interesting thing that occurs in this book is missionaries to the Saudi Peninsula. They befriended Ibn Saud, who was eventually going to capture Mecca a decade later. But they treated Ibn Saud and his family when they were before they accumulated and controlled Mecca. And they introduced hospital and public health programs, which gave America a leg up, particularly over Britain, who was jealous of our special relationship with the Sauds. Okay, so a little section will be where we'll stop. The second awakening started specifically in one place before the haystack, but it started in northern Kentucky. My parents met nearby in Covington, Kentucky. But this camp meeting, this is the first camp meeting that set off the second awakening, specifically right there. Pretty soon it spawned camp meetings throughout the region. And all these little dots are camp meetings. And people going to camp meetings. A real phenomenon. And this will be where we'll stop. We'll talk about the social reform that came out of the second Great Awakening. So I'll stop share and take questions. Oh, Tim's here. Our youngest son, I'll be darned. Shigeko.
Okay. I just wanted to say, 60 Minutes says that Trump shut down Voice of America, which I thought was really important. And also, I wanted to ask you, when you say increased religiosity, what is the criteria based on? Is it church attendance or is it real transformation of lives? I was wondering what kind of criteria.
Well, the one map I showed, it was just a survey of the question was, is religion a very strong value for you? And it was the percent of people that said, yes, it's very strong. So that's local polling. Going back in history, I suppose attendance at camp meetings. We'll see, and we see in Western movies the establishment of actual church buildings. So there comes a time, and it's very always a part of a lot of Westerns. The town reaches a point where they've got a sheriff, and now they got a church, and then they have a school marm. So in the early days, in these small communities, church attendance was if you didn't go to church, it was quite noticeable, right? So some of that was just social, going for the service and staying for the food.
Oh, well, the reason I said that was, when my friend and I were in the East Coast in 2018, all the churches were shutting down, which really surprised me because I always thought the East Coast had a very religious, history. And a lot of the churches were pharmacies. So, I was wondering where all this religiosity is being recorded.
Well, as I said, we're retreating from our previous high, and so you saw all those downward curves for different denominations. But even with churches closing in America, we're still higher than other countries, particularly Europe. It's a little tricky because we may be and have been on a downward slope, but as I said, Gen Z may be reversing that trend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, John, did you happen to see that the federal health workers were all laid off, 10,000 of them?
Yeah, it's a disaster.
But they're giving opportunities you could go back to the Navajo reservation, or you could go out to Alaska, or they're giving alternatives. You can.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody want to go with us?
It's Greenland.
Yeah, Greenland would maybe could.
They have people with frostbite up there.
Well, I'm telling you, the surest way to become a millionaire, Tim, is to immigrate to Greenland. If you can get Greenland citizenship, you'll eventually be a millionaire.
Yeah, Trump will buy you all out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or he'll invade.
Yeah. Well, it's been pointed out that Trump and Denmark are both members of NATO, and Trump could put as many army bases as he wants. We're down to one, but we voluntarily closed down, I think, 15. So he could go back in at the drop of a hat. Nobody would stop him.
We had 15 bases in Greenland and we're down to one. Is
Yeah.
that what you said?
I think even more.
had 17,
I think during the Cold War there were even more.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Did we have bases with Canada at one point also up in Canada, or were they purely Canadian?
Well, I think during World War II, I'm sure we had observatories. That's not the right word, but monitoring things flying in on the Great Flyway. I'm sure that we had an integrated monitoring system. I mean, we have sites in Australia, right? When monitoring our satellites and all kinds of things.
Actually, recently there was an article in the National Geographic a couple months ago, and my neighbor, he was assigned in I think in 1964, he was at Camp Century, which is in Greenland, and the amazing amount of tunnels and things that they had done in basically it was as part of the Cold War, and they were trying to figure out ways to move around the missiles, and the problem was is ultimately the glaciers were constantly moving, and so ultimately in 1969 it was abandoned, and so they just kind of rediscovered it recently with some flyovers and saying, oh wow, there's something under there. And
yeah, LIDAR. They can do that. They can do that with LIDAR. But you remember in 1942 when the Nazis took over Denmark, we took over Greenland, America. And I think during World War II, we had maybe a dozen bases in Greenland, particularly on the East Coast. German subs, monitoring German subs coming out of that gap between Great Britain and Iceland. And at the end of World War II, you'll remember we talked to Denmark. Denmark was expecting us to leave, but we didn't leave. And Truman offered $100 million to buy Greenland, and Greenland politely refused, but we still didn't leave. And finally, we both joined NATO, and that resolved the whole conflict. Now we were both under the same umbrella, and there was no conflict. And we're still in NATO. I don't know. I don't know what will happen when Trump quits NATO.
You think that's going to happen?
Let's hope not.
It's kind of interesting that Thomas Jefferson defended the Baptists because they were very black and white, right? Everybody could come, and yet Jefferson is a slaveholder.
Well, I think in the early days that wasn't so much true. They become multiracial with the start of the abolition movement, which is around 1830 or 1840. So I don't think that in Jefferson's day the Baptists were integrated. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
I'm going to miss next week, so
all right, Bruce. Well,
yeah, you can save all of the sneaky stuff till then.
Oh, we'll be getting into Manifest Destiny and Texas and the war of Mexican-American War. So when you come back, America will be 50% larger.
Okay, all right, good deal.
All right.
Okay.
It's good to
Thanks
hear
all.
you do this again, Dad. It's been a little while, so
Yeah,
Yeah, Tim used to
just decided to
just be a
stop in.
new face.
This is great because Tim is used to listening to me at double speed.